Yeah, three, two, one. Hey, so we're going to record now. So, yeah, Sustainiacs. I forgot who the heck we were. As a matter of fact, I'm always a Sustainiac. Then, like my guest is the other one, so then it's Sustainiacs. This time, the victim is Matt McLelland or McLelland. I mean, Dooner calls it McLelland, right? So it's got to be McLelland, right?
Yeah, he's got it wrong. It's McLelland.
Yeah, he's usually is, and usually on the easiest of words to pronounce. He has a difficult time, which is one of the many, many reasons I love him, and he's awesome.
Here we are.
Here we are, man. I'm so glad that you accepted. I had to keep shaming you on LinkedIn. No, that's not true. But so, hey, vice president of, is it senior VP, whatever it is, sustainability and innovation
Yes,
at Covenant Transport, right?
I always get a kick. Sometimes I'll get introduced as the chief sustainability officer, and I'll laugh because, I would love to have that title. It probably would come with a bigger paycheck, and it definitely would open more doors. But nope, it's just VP of Sustainability and Innovation, and we're going to unpack what that means, right?
That C level means like you're like can be held accountable legally and stuff like that, though, right? For the company, doesn't it?
Among other things, yes, it does.
Among other things,
not also means stock options, and I have to have a pretty headshot of me not wearing a hat on a website, things like that. My name, quarterly report, that kind of stuff.
Yeah. See, I mean, I did my earlier podcast with my Frankenchrist T-shirt on.
Oh yeah,
yeah. For my dead Kennedys. I had to. It was about Silicon Valley Bank and California Uber alles, so I had to go for it. You know what I mean? What you got on there?
Look at that. I'm wearing a Covenant T-shirt. How about that? And that wasn't even. Our brokerage group, we created these Covenant T-shirts, and they have a pocket. I love T-shirts.
A T-shirt with a pocket. Sweet.
I know. So I'll hook you up.
That's really, yeah. You got to hook me. Am I allowed? Can I have a Dead Kennedy shirt and a Covenant shirt on the same program? Is that allowed?
That's pretty hipster. I'm not sure. I mean, we're a cool company, but that would be really hip.
That'd be very, 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 very hip. So, hey, Matt, why are you sustainable?
So, there's so many ways to answer that question, man, right? There's personal, there's professional. It really is this crazy overused word, right? I mean, I hear that word so like in everything from the way we eat food to sustainable travel and vacations and people, eco resort, sustainable this and that, so, as it relates to me personally, if you hadn't tell my Arc'teryx hat, I'm wearing my Orvis, thing. I'm a big outdoors guy. I love the outdoors, right?
Couldn't tell.
When I finish here, I'm going to go mountain biking before the end of the day. I love being outdoors. And so, a few years ago, I was, one thing I love about this is we're doing all this in real time, and I probably should shut down my email so all these noises stop showing up, right?
So did you call? Did you set all those up to make it sound like you were important while you were on air?
Yeah, no, that's a total accident. So it's funny. So 4 years ago, my son and I climbed Grand Teton, and so I'm standing on top of this mountain. It's a beautiful day. I'm with my kid, and I'm looking out over all this. Vincent, and all I could think of was, I hope I get to see this. I hope he gets to see this with his son or daughter one day, right? And, as you think about the definition of sustainable, the ability to meet our needs today without infringing on the next generation's ability to meet theirs, right? At the end of the day, that's what it's all about. So,
that's the definition from like 1984, right? Wasn't that the definition from the very first?
It's still good. Still works.
It is still good, right?
And for professionally, as it relates to my job, we're a trucking company. We have 2,500 diesel trucks, right? We burned 308 million gallons of diesel last year. You could do a simple calculation and come up with carbon and all kinds of, equivalent, metric tons of carbon associated with that. And at the end of the day, we're just a company that we, even before it was cool to think about it, we need to do everything we can to mitigate that, right? To reduce our impact on the environment, to be a more sustainable company. And so, in a nutshell, that's kind of what I get to think about every day.
So let me ask this. You had this thing, and I think you posted pictures of you and your son up there. Did you not? or am I thinking of somebody else? Because I'm
You
now
would be thinking
associating
like
you with some.
Instagram. Yeah, LinkedIn.
Yeah,
I don't think I have a picture of that. You know what? I did have a picture of us on LinkedIn. I did.
but it might have been Instagram, might have been somebody else. But you did post pictures of that moment because I want to say that I did. Maybe I'm making that up. I don't know. I'm 57 years old. I can't remember what I remember and what I don't remember, or remember that is false. You know what I'm saying? Something like that. I don't know. But
It was a very kind of memorable moment for me. And I'm not saying it was like that's what set my sustainability journey, but when I think about that all the time when I'm outside and when I'm in a presentation in a boardroom talking to a customer about what their sustainability goals are. I don't know. I always kind of think back to that moment, and at the end of the day, that's one of the reasons why I love getting up and going to work in the morning.
yeah, I mean, it's interesting because for me, it was, I grew up I mean, that '70s show was my childhood pretty much. It was pretty darn close, right? But I spent a lot of time outside and stuff like. I grew up in Northeast Ohio, but right next to a huge swamp, and so I spent most of my summers outside constantly. Free range parenting and the whole thing back then. And I look back and I think, man, I hope all that stuff stays for my kids and their grandkids and stuff like that. But at the time, we weren't polluting anything. Plastics were beautiful. You could work on a car engine. There wasn't
Oh
all this. Was a carburetor, a couple pistons, and a distributor cap, and roll, baby. Right? Maybe
But
an
it's so
exhaust.
funny when you think about how many things have changed. Going down memory lane, I remember when I was 16 years old, I changed the oil for the first time in my Datsun, not a Nissan, but a Datsun 280Z. And when I
Nice.
had that 5, 6 quarts of oil, I walked inside. I said, "Dad, what am I supposed to do with this?" He's like, "I don't know. Go dig a hole and bury it." And
Yeah,
and we did stupid stuff like that, right?
that's
When
what we
we
did.
were
Yes, we
back
did.
then, and we've come a long way. I don't even think that would occur. Well, no 16-year-old would change their oil now themselves, right? Um,
No, no.
God forbid, right? But it's just a different world now. So yeah, I mean, it's really fun to get up every day and to think about how not to do things like that.
Yeah. So I mean, so how did you fall into this or grab into this at Covenant? How did that happen at Covenant? Because you said, people refer to you they wish, they call you chief sustainability officer. You're not, whatever. It doesn't matter. But how did it happen at Covenant? Did you like say, hey, listen, we need somebody doing this and I'd like to do this? Or did somebody say, hey, you know what? We need somebody. McLelland looks like he hasn't bathed in a couple of days. Let's get him to do it. He looks sustainable. How did that occur?
Yeah, because we're all sort of dirty, grungy, VW driving, you know. Yeah, no, it's a great question, Michael. And I remember in 2018, we got an RFP where this customer's asking about electrification and do we have an experience with it? And I think that man had even said, and at the end, like, do you have a position on autonomous technology is going to be part of the future, right? So this was a kind of a green question and a future question,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and the sales guy said, I don't know, Matt has innovation in his title, like call him, right? Because I was hired to kind of come in. It was a different role. It was kind of more IT based, but it was about new products and innovations that we needed to be think about strategically and as we move into the future. So I had some answers. Right, I had looked into electrification. The customer actually happened to be coming in, and so I presented to them, and it was a real organic, fun conversation. And some of our senior leadership were in the room, like, "Wow, you really handled that well." And they like, you need to spend some more time looking at that because guess what? Next month we had another RFP and then
Uh,
another RFP. And then now we're into like 2019. And it seems like every third RFP has some question about carbon and, some future based question or what our MPG was. And so, you know, eventually, I had a talk with one of our, my boss at the time, our president. I said, what if we pivoted this role to be more research based, do more prototypes, have a budget to actually invest and test in some of these things. And
yeah.
long story short, we created the position, and now it's. I mean, we get almost everything we get involved in. In fact, right now I'm working with the sales guy. I had to shut down that window. They're pounding me with emails about we need some slides for our next presentation.
That's really interesting. So, yeah, because when you said that there was this change, and you were specifically on innovation and technology, I think the first time that you were on the truck with Dooner and I, you didn't have sustainability in your title at that
No,
time. Now that I think
no,
about
I
it,
didn't. Yeah. And sustainability is everything from what comes out of the tailpipe. It has to do with what your company's doing,
sure,
inside an office building, recycling programs, and if you're the kind of company that hauls hazardous waste, there's a lot of different ways to kind of look at sustainability. We can kind of peel back the layers on some of that. A lot of people
sure,
just think it's about trailer skirts and flares and or alternative fuels. I mean, at some point, we'll get around to talking about this. This is a product called renewable diesel that we're really
yeah,
excited about. Um, but at the end of the day, I get up every morning and I read the Wall Street Journal. I read Freight Waves. I read things from ACT Research. I talk to friends of mine at GNA, Gladstein, Anderson Associates. They're real thought leaders in the green space when it comes to fleets. And I just look at all the different things that are happening and kind of synthesize it, figure out what makes sense, what doesn't make sense for the kind of company we are. And I will sort of recommend things that we should be following and things we should be investing in. And we can talk about what some of those things are. I'm really excited about a couple of things I'm looking at right now.
yeah. Let's get into some of those here in a minute. I'm really, I mean, we will. I want to go down all those paths, but when you talk about the development of the position, right? And you went and said, "Hey, we need to let's pivot this a little bit because it's becoming more and more important." And that was, obviously very very good prognostication because it came to fruition. More and more RFPs are asking for this type of stuff. Is it becoming a requirement to be able to answer those in the right manner in order to win those RFPs now, or and how has that kind of changed? That is it becoming more of a demand, and you have to be now, or do you see that coming in the future? Or?
Yeah, so I'll give you. It's a great question, Vincent. I'll give you an example. There's this platform called Ecovatus. It's I think it's based in like I don't know Greenland or somewhere overseas, and those clean green Norwegian countries. But
Yeah,
it's a platform that companies that rates your greenness. Right, it rates you in four categories: labor and human rights, environment, corporate governance, and something related to sort of HR and people. And there's about 80 questions, and you answer all these questions, and they're specific to the type of vertical market that you're in. And some of the questions are everything from: do you have a human trafficking position, a human rights policy? Do you have sustainable procurement objectives? On the environmental stuff, do you have recycling programs? It's this whole list of things that it asks. And ultimately, it doesn't just assume that you're telling the truth. You have to attach a document and reference, like in our employee handbook on page 14, it
yeah.
provides the proof that this
You
question
can't
that I'm
just say
answering
I'm
is real.
against human trafficking and be done with it. You have to
Exactly.
prove.
So, and
Yeah,
then they review it and they assign you a score. And a lot of the bids that we are bidding on, the customers require that you have a score of like 45 and above. We actually have a pretty decent score on it. We can always do better. Um, but it's almost becoming a requirement to have a position on that platform in order to be considered. Um, you
yeah.
know,
That's interesting.
one company
Where is
kind of
it
requires.
so versus the traditional items that they grade you on as far as price and service, right, and customer
Yep.
service. Where is this grade coming to now? Where does it fall in there?
I mean,
I mean,
trust me, they
are
still.
you going to charge more because you have a higher price now, or because you have a higher score? Can you know what I'm saying? Does that overcome a higher price, or less service because you have, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I mean, so it's a good question because think about it like this. I mean, in trucking, and you covered this for a long time. You
Yeah,
know, some ways we're all commodity, right? We all drive new truck. I mean, think about the big boys, right? Think about people on the 50 and higher list, right? So everything from Werner and Schneider and Knight Swift, down to U.S. Express and Covenant and Paper Transport and Hub Group. Look, if you
sure,
take those top 50, right? In a way, we all operate modern assets. We all have pretty competitive pricing. We all
sure,
probably have pretty similar safety records, and we all probably have good time, timely delivery schedules. We probably
sure.
all have customer service. So then, at the end of the day, what really makes us different, right? And I think maybe some person does flatbeds, maybe some, Covenant, we have 850 team trucks. So we have this big
Yeah.
expedited thing that makes us unique. Maybe somebody else's network is so big that, they're able to do anything at all times, no matter what. So when you look at all of us, this sustainability stuff is really a way to differentiate yourselves. Partially because maybe we can talk about what it means for a company to be good. But you can sort of try to outgood the other company or outgreen the other company. For some of us, it's just always kind of been a part of who we are. So we're not really putting on a new hat. We're just telling our story in a way that we never told it before. So I think that, to answer your question directly about can you charge more because you're doing more, the answer is yes and no. It's yes, in that if you have a customer that's really committed to reducing their carbon footprint,
Yeah.
there's certain assets and equipment that you're going to have in order to do that. And those just aren't going to happen in the regular rate that you pay for a diesel truck. For example, if you want zero emissions and you need an electric truck and it's inside of the range of that truck, you might pay a rate that's 2, 3, 4 times what you're used to paying, because the price of that asset and the infrastructure involved to put that thing in is significantly more expensive. So, is the customer willing to pay for that? It depends.
Yeah.
Sometimes they are, sometimes they aren't.
I would imagine some customers are just looking for it to just tick a box that they asked, and maybe the minimum score is good enough, and then they look for pricing. I mean, there are carriers out there, not going to name them, but LTL or truckload, doesn't matter, that are cut rate because that's what they are. When I was brokering those, I knew who they were, and I'd tell customers, hey, if you pick this carrier, don't call me when it turns hot. You pick the carrier. That.
Yeah, and there's some things that we're all doing, right? We all have low rolling resistance tires, and we're all running trucks that are probably less than 3 years old, meaning we're always taking advantage of the latest, kind of engine performance, enhancements. We're all probably using, wheel covers or trailer skirts, things like that. But then you get into like, well, I held this up a minute ago. So this is a product. This is called renewable. Yeah, so this is called renewable diesel. Right.
Okay.
This is regular old number 2, and this is renewable diesel. So out of the tailpipe, this has 60% fewer greenhouse gas emissions than this stuff. It's called a drop-in fuel. You don't have to make any changes to your engine. Right. At a molecular level, this stuff is identical to this stuff in every way, except it's a different color. It's not biodiesel. It's renewable diesel. It's made from the same feedstock. It's one of the greatest products ever. The engine manufacturers of all the OEMs prefer that you use this over this. It's like one of the only things in life that's a sure thing, all upside and no downside. You can well, Matt, that's great. How come everybody's not using it? Because you can't get it everywhere. Mm-hmm. In fact, there's only a few places in California where you can get it reliably. We run it in 4 trucks out there where we have access to it on a pretty regular basis. But if you could use my truck running this versus one of my competitors' trucks that's running this, you get 60% fewer greenhouse gas emissions from this, and the price of fuel by gallon is the same. Well, that's going to make me more attractive all day long, right?
Of course.
So, sometimes it's little stuff like this. A carrier can figure out how to get access to this in a lane where it's not available to other people, and that can really push you over the edge. But some customers don't care about it, right?
Yeah, no, that's interesting stuff. I mean, what makes these things so hard to adopt? I mean, if OEMs want this stuff in their engines, and I'm guessing it's because it burns cleaner, it stresses the engine less. The engine's probably got to burn at a lower temperature, which causes less stress, et cetera, right? I mean, so the maintenance is less on this thing. And it's relatively the same cost to do this. Why isn't it everywhere? Why can't you just fill up Covenant trailers or trucks all over the place with this stuff?
Well, beginning, it's a supply problem. So and they're spinning up more and more of these renewable diesel refineries. The raw material in it, though, it's called feedstock, is your typical stuff from bio. It's like bacon grease and French fry oil. And,
I got you. Yeah.
There's some animal excrement and wood chips. I mean, there's a lot of things that are in it. Yeah. From what I understand, the supply is not as big of a problem. But right now, what they're using this feedstock for is this product called renewable aviation fuel, which is yes, it's refined a little bit different, but it's not diesel. It's avgas. The
Yeah.
margin on that stuff is much higher when you sell it than it is for a gallon of diesel. So,
Yeah.
if Bill Gates and Mark Benioff and all these sort of billionaires that are talking about ESG and environment, they all want renewable aviation fuel. And so right now, so much of this is being designated for the aviation market. It doesn't really leave, the over the road truck market a
Which is,
whole lot of supply right now.
it's one of those things that it drives me nuts. It's like Adidas saying, "Hey, we're taking plastic bottles and turning them into clothing and shoes," saying, "Hey, aren't we great? We're recycling." Well, it's really not that good of a thing, actually, because you can recycle a bottle up to 20 times before its end of life and then turn it into a shoe. As soon as you turn it into a shoe, you can never recycle it again. So it's really not that good a thing that what Adidas is doing. Right? It's kind of a bad thing because it's reducing that life. Aviation emissions are such a small fraction of greenhouse emissions compared to diesel truck emissions.
You make more money per gallon. If you're making this stuff, if you're cooking this stuff up at your refinery, if you're Exxon or Shell or Mobil, and
Yeah,
you can make $2 a gallon profit of
I
using it
get
to
it.
make aviation fuel as opposed to making 10 cents a gallon using it to make diesel fuel for trucks, then,
I
so it's
get
a
it.
supply problem. So here's the thing. Last week, I testified remotely over Zoom in front of the Oregon State Legislature. There's
Oh
a
yeah, I
bill
saw
called
your post on that. Yeah,
yeah, it's called SB 803, and there's this guy that I'm friends with. He owns a 45 truck fleet out of
yeah.
Portland, Oregon. Keith Wilson. It's called Titan Logistics or Titan Freight, and he's been running renewable diesel in his trucks for the last 2 years. He hasn't done an oil change. He tests every truck every 10,000 miles, and the fuel. I mean, I'm sorry, the oil in that thing, it just never breaks down. He doesn't foul injectors. He doesn't do as many forced regens.
Yeah.
I mean, there's all these benefits that he gets from it, and so he has worked with one of the state legislatures to create this bill where it would potentially be the only diesel product sold at the pump throughout the state, and
Ah,
at a cost parity identical to diesel. And so, what I was testifying for, it was really short. It wasn't that big of a deal. It was, you know, I was committing Covenant would use the state of Oregon to refuel more often, when we're passing through going to California or Washington or
sure.
Idaho to the east. And, we would use their truck stops, we would refuel because that fuel is more attractive to us. And we would use more of it. So, I mean, that's just one example of the cool things that I look at. And granted, anybody out there can use it. It's not like I've discovered something that, only I have access to. In fact, I'll tell people about this, my competitors, they get excited and then they go eat up all the supply. So there's less for me.
They do, but it's the right thing to do. And Covenant, in my experience, has always been one that does the right thing. And that brings me to the question you had before, talking about how does a company do good, right? And I've always contend, like, just because you're following the mandates and the laws of sustainability doesn't necessarily mean that you are a sustainable or green company. Just because I put this premise on there that you have to actually be making some sort of effort to further it or to become better or to be more green or more sustainable, like having someone like a Matt McLelland out there pushing your company forward and looking for that next thing rather than just somebody sitting there making sure you're following the latest mandate and or measure that California puts out, et cetera. What's your thought on that? How does a company do good?
So, listen, I'm sure what I'm about to say could be a lot of your listeners that would disagree with this, but I think that today in 2023, that most companies out there are not would probably be good even if there wasn't OSHA and regulatory agencies sort of forcing them to do things that would keep their people safe, to keep the environment safe. I mean, maybe there would still be some bad actors out there where people would, dump stuff into the river or whatnot. But I think that at this point in history, in modern history, most companies try to do good. They want to keep their employees safe. They don't want them to get hurt. They want to protect the environment. I'm kind of a fairly sort of center right guy politically. And I think that regulation, I'm for it. I don't like too much regulation, but when it comes to regulation of, of our industry, there's a lot of things that I really agree with. And I'm glad that we do it. And I think that even though most companies would probably, like, I'll give you an example, CARB 2024. We all hate it because
Yep.
nobody's going to be able to make a truck that meets those standards. But
Right.
I think it's great that California is pushing, that they're throwing down the gauntlet and saying, hey,
Totally
if I
agree.
don't throw down this gauntlet, nobody's going to be making trucks any better than they are right now. So I'm going to throw down this really difficult, onerous sort of thing. And we all hate it. But deep down, I kind of like it. Does that make sense? Like,
Oh, yeah, no, I totally agree with you.
I think Gavin Newsom is crazy for saying things like no cars after 2035 will be sold in California that run on traditional petroleum-based fuel.
yeah.
But I mean, God bless him, right? I mean, if he didn't throw down the gauntlet, no Elon Musk would come up with this dream of electrifying, or really, it's not about electrification for Elon. It's about minimizing the impact to the planet. And I think whether you're Republican or Democrat, that's something we all agree on, right?
I would think so. Yeah, I think. Yeah, no, there's no doubt about it. We agree on the ends, the ends. It's the means sometimes that are a little frustrating. Not being allowed. Certain states not allowing or not allowing certain states to, invest in green companies, et cetera, stuff like that, which has cost taxpayers a ton of money in many states, several hundred million.
Going back to what you're saying about companies being good or being like, is it more important to be
Yeah.
labeled good or to do good? So, I think that's an interesting sort of thing to explore a little bit more, Vincent,
Yeah, let's
because,
do it.
I think that, even before ESG was a thing, or CSR was a thing, or sustainability was part of an RFP like it was for us in 2018, like I remember the owner of our company at the time before we went public, he invested in this really complicated machine that was going to recycle the gray water from the way we washed our trucks, and we would be able to use that water over and over again. Spent a ton of money on this thing because it was like the right thing to do. Like where our office is, there's like a watershed and some Canadian geese that live in this pond, and we just really wanted to make sure that we used a tremendous amount of water, but we want to make sure that if we could use it again, why not? And so, we have this history of investing in things where, granted, some of it was under the auspices of better fuel economy, right? Because if you have better fuel economy, your assets run better and you can save money and hopefully increase your profitability a little bit. So maybe not all of the motivation was pure altruism, but I think generally speaking, we've always been a company that has strove to do the right thing, even when it wasn't expected of us. When it comes to looking at some of these more aggressive decarbonization moves like zero electric vehicles, zero emission vehicles, or things that are just sort of like this green, like this stuff, that are keeping carbon out of the air. I like it that some of our customers are pushing us in that direction.
Mm-hmm.
But I think most companies, would do the right thing. I'm not saying they all would. I'm not a complete idiot, right?
Yeah, no. I mean, you can't be completely gullible and naive. I think that's the right word. You'd be naive to think that everybody's going to do that. And here's the thing: there's plenty out there that would, but they don't have the facilities or they don't have the capacity to do that. Not every company can employ a Matt McLelland to go around and do this stuff and bring these type of benefits to them, even though because they're longer term benefits, right? I mean, bringing these things, and some of them are kind of softer kind of benefits, is winning these RFPs or putting yourself in a better position to win these RFPs because of the work that you're doing there, et cetera, is all very real. But there's many companies that can't afford to do that type of stuff, right? And they have to just kind of follow along behind those leaders, like yourself and at Covenant, right?
But unpack that a little bit more and think about it like this: like, don't just talk about companies here in the United States. Think about the fact that we're a global economy,
Sure.
right? And let's don't think about trucking for a second. Let's think about, I don't know, making this cup, right? This Dometic cup that I've got right here. Like, it could be made in the United States or it could be made in China. Okay, so let's think about the Paris Climate Accord, right? That was, people got mad at Trump because he wouldn't go. And, not to sort of take this conversation in a different direction, but, what people forget, Trump didn't want to go because he's like, listen, unless the world's biggest polluters, India, China, some of these other countries, if they are not going to be held to the same standards that we're all going to hold ourselves to, then what difference does it make?
Yeah,
And people
exactly.
got mad at him, like, well, we should set an example. And I get all that. But at the end of the day, if it's going to cost us $1 to make this in the United States with, all the different rules and regulations we have to do it cleaner, greener, better, and somebody in another country that isn't bound by the accord can do it for 5 cents, well, then all of a sudden we're no longer competitive and nobody's going to buy our cups anymore.
Yeah.
So, I'm
Yeah.
not saying Trump should or shouldn't have gone. I'm just saying that it's complicated. And to your point, because you brought it up, not some people can't afford to do some of this stuff or they won't be competitive anymore. So it's a balance.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. And it leads me towards that. I agree with you 100%. And that's one of the things that drove offshoring, right? Now we've got this other shoring kind of thing going on, and people think there's near shoring or onshoring. It's debatable on whether that's actually happening or not, because all these efforts to try and near shore and onshore, but China's still exporting a ton of stuff into the United States, and probably more than ever. There is a chip war going on, but all that happened because of those lack of regulations, and we lost manufacturing due to those type of things, and that's very, very true. As we move forward with this sustainability and talking about it from a logistics standpoint, which you're in, obviously, do you agree that the have and have-nots are going to change as we keep moving forward and supply chains kind of move? For example, the in the what is it, the IRA, that Biden put out a couple years ago, right? Inside there was was a big incentive, several $100 million or billion, to incentivize EV purchases and production in the United States, or EV purchases, right? Well, Volvo and so on say, well, we're going to invest more money into the North American economy because there's the incentive and there's where the market's going to grow faster than in Europe. So Europe's got to now change their type of policy as well. And you've got kind of this almost sustainability war, if you will.
Yeah, I mean, it's at the end of the day, it's all like, I don't think I've ever met anybody on the other side of this argument, right? Like,
Yeah.
who doesn't want corporate America to be more cognizant of the role that we play on the environment? Like, I just, like, even the person on the most extreme side of that issue, I think, could drive behind a diesel truck and look at the stuff coming out the tailpipe and say, yeah, that's not good. Like, I don't have to follow the science on that one. I just know that that's not a good idea. And so that's one of the great things about, about what I get to get up and do every day, Vincent, is to think about these sorts of things and to advise companies and even meet with my peers. Yesterday, I talked with an hour with this guy or his company that we compete against directly. And we were sharing ideas about this new device that we both want to pilot. And we were trying to sort of share the different KPIs that we were going to use to measure how successful this thing was at doing what it was claiming. And eventually, after an hour, I stumbled onto a question. He said, Matt, I can't answer that question because it's like proprietary. And I'm like, oh, yeah. Oh, shoot. I'm sorry. You're right. I shouldn't have asked that question. But we talked for an hour before we got to a point where, we couldn't talk anymore. And I think that's great when you can share with your competitors information that helps all of us, sort of get to a better place.
No, that collaboration, and that brings me to another point there. That collaboration and that transparency between competitors. I guess you call it co-opetition, right? I think Bill Driegert said co-opetition. He was calling that.
Right,
but anyways, it makes co-opetition. It makes a lot of sense. But is there a slope there? So you got Descartes coming out with, or not Descartes, Oracle, with this new platform, right? So you've got people like the intermediaries, et cetera, like Freightvana and some others. Edge Logistics, I was talking to Will Kerr there at Edge Logistics, where they're actually, providing information to their shippers, carriers, et cetera, but mainly to shippers on the carbon footprint of their business, right? And kind of helping them shape that and report that. Do they start to become managers of that? And what is the responsibility and both ethically and legally of covenant when you put these things in those RFPs, right? There's got to be there's some risk there, is there not, from greenwashing or something like that? I mean, does that put you on the hook to say, okay, ABC shipping company says that they're green because of this, and they're looking at this score that Covenant provided, et cetera? Does that say, hey, Matt, you got to go and defend this position at some point? I mean, where do those risks come in?
So I've got some really good friends that have companies that do this. So I want to be careful how I respond to this. But at the end of the day, what you're talking about is something called carbon accounting,
Mm-hmm.
and it's a way for companies to keep track of what their carbon is putting out. There's three ways you calculate your carbon footprint. It's called scope one, scope two, and scope three, right? Scope one are all the things that you're responsible for as a normal course of doing business. If you make widgets, the pollution and all the different activities that go on in your factory, the people that you purchase goods and services. So number two, scope two, is the energy that you use and what's the carbon footprint for that. Scope three is, you're responsible for the carbon of the people that you procure goods and services from. So if I'm driving a truck for you, Covenant's carbon belongs to you. So then the question is, how do I keep track of all this, right? What
Yeah.
kind of accounting system do I use to keep track of all this? Well, I'm just telling you, Vincent, there are so many assumptions and guesses in that world that, to your point, and there's no way really to hold people's feet to the flame and say, prove that you polluted this much or polluted, like, how could I figured that number would be a lot more. Show me how you arrived at that number. There's a lot of guesstimation involved with all that. And what's interesting is, and at some point I'd love to learn more about your listener base, because some of them may or may not understand what I'm about to say. But when it comes to a company having an ESG plan and publicly presenting sort of what their footprint is and kind of
Right.
what their metrics are, like, we take that really seriously, and we haven't done it yet. We're waiting for the SEC to come back with their ruling in April. We think is when it's going to come out, that it's going to kind of dictate what publicly traded companies are expected to do with ESG reporting and how carbon
Right.
reporting works. But
Yeah.
until we get an idea of what they want that to look like and how strict it needs to be, we've been very hesitant to capture, calculate, and record those numbers. Now, if I have a shipper that wants to say, Matt, if you're going to do business with me, you got to give me a carbon report, we can do that. And we can do it pretty accurately. But if you're this massive company with all these private assets, if you're like Pepsi and you've got 8,000 trucks in your fleet and you're running everything from diesel to bio to renewable diesel, and you've got to keep track of all this, that's like a full-time job for a team of people. And there's a lot of assumptions that you have to kind of make when
Right.
you're doing it. I filled up this gas tank with number two, and that has a carbon intensity score of this. And then I topped it off with this renewable diesel, and that has a carbon intensity of this. And, like, keeping track of all that stuff is almost impossible. So, to answer your question in a roundabout sort of
Yeah.
way, you should be held accountable for it. You should be able to demonstrate on some level how you arrived at your numbers. And if you can't demonstrate it, you should be held accountable for it. If somebody's doing
Yeah.
business with you, you're telling them that I've got a footprint of this and you picked them because of that instead of me, you got to be able to prove it.
Yeah. No, I don't disagree with you. It's one of those things. It's like, I've pivoted really, obviously away from from freight waves, and now I'm OPT USA and doing logistics for plastics recycling, and it's kind of like certification of plastics, right? You can have ocean plastics, ocean bound plastics, beach, estuary, near shore, offshore, all these different things. There's no law or regulation. It is much, hey, do you keep the locations on where this stuff was collected? Have you visited the sites? Do you have drone footage? Can you prove or show how the collection works, et cetera? What are the waste management facilities and or policies like in the area where you're collecting it? That type of stuff. But there's no hard and fast rules. And that's kind of what you're talking about, right? If you have a logical conclusion or a logical equation, whatever it happens to be, program process for determining this, that you're green or you're doing this, then that should be enough, right? If you're just saying it and there's no process or effort underneath there at all, then you should be held accountable. Because I was talking to Zvi Schreiber from Freightos, And he was talking about the carbon footprint of air freight, and belly cargo doesn't get. He argues that belly cargo should have a much lower carbon footprint than freighter cargo, just because that belly was moving anyways, right?
Yeah,
I
but
mean,
that's not the way it works.
it's not the way it works. It's not the way it works, but
Um,
that empty space was moving regardless. So I don't know if that's true, but it just goes to show you that there's so many different opinions that are out there and how this stuff goes. But
yeah,
as we go through the data collection and the Oracle type of stuff, where they can go down to the level of the type of truck, and as we have this transparency in data, a really an intermediary or whomever, even a shipper, will be able to know, okay, it was this specific Covenant truck, or it was this specific, Swift Night truck, or whatever happens to be. How long until the specifics of that truck or the specifics of this warehouse or whatever becomes part of that ESG measurement as that data grows? It's not
I mean, if you're,
necessarily.
I'll give you. So this is kind of nerd. I can't remember. Are most people listening or are they watching this?
Most people are listening, but yeah.
So what I'm shuffling through right here are ESG reports for. So this is one for Hershey Foods, right? This is their ESG report, and in the back of this report is where they report their numbers. It reports the KPIs on their employees, and then they kind of get into the environmental KPIs that show their carbon footprints. Well, if I was investing, right, and this is kind of where ESG investing and some of the stuff that I'm about to talk about comes from, in this company based on the reports, the numbers that they're putting in this report, and I'm like, oh my gosh, Hershey is so much better than, I don't know, whoever their competitors are in the chocolate business. I'm going to invest in these people because their ESG score is just crazy great. It's so impressive. They're doing so much. But then, if you had to sort of say justify that number, like, well, we just kind of guessed it. We threw a dart at the wall. Well, then what's the point? And that's the whole point of ESG investing. And that's what a lot of this stuff is when you read in the paper, some people for it, some people against it. Kind of the way that argument breaks down is, some people would argue that the SEC's job is to make sure you're not lying about your financials, right? That's what the role of, it's more than that. But at the end of the day, that's what the SEC wants. If you're going to be an ESG investor, what they want you to do is we want to create standards so that people can validate these ESG reports. So if you publish a number, you have to be able to stand by your number and be audited on that number, or you're going to be held accountable for that number. If somebody wants to sue you because you said you were greener than the other option and there's nothing behind the data that you published, then you should be held accountable for that. And that's kind of what the argument's about. For us, I'm not comfortable publishing a report until I know what the requirements are going to be on how to get there and what the
I don't
auditing is
disagree.
going to look like.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I just feel like you're just guessing. Maybe even, I don't know. Yeah, you're just guessing. But listen,
Or
I'm
yeah,
not,
yeah.
I'm not I don't know if they are or not. I just know that it's really hard to keep track of this stuff.
Yeah. Well, you could be unintentionally legally lying, right? Right, in a legal sense of the word, or whatever it happens to be, or negligent, or whatever it happens to be. I always argued about that, about some of the data, et cetera, that it can be gathered through different IoT devices within the cab of a truck, is that if you're gathering all this data and then you're not doing anything with it, I think that's it opens you up to some legal ramifications if there's some safety issues or or an accident or something like that, right?
What's interesting is and I know you know about this, but in our industry, SmartWay is it's a function of the EPA, and carriers have SmartWay certification. This
Yeah,
is from our 2021 CSR report. Covenant was what was called, we achieved what's called high performer status.
there you
That's a
go.
designation given to fewer than 10% of all the SmartWay carriers based on
Nice.
a higher level of performance. Well, yeah, pat myself on the back, right? Well, here's what's interesting about SmartWay. And this is the thing that nobody likes talking about is this is all self-reported data. So the data that we
Sure.
report, the data that US Express reports, and the data Werner reports is all self-reported and it's not validated. And so then you could argue like, well, how do I know somebody's not telling the truth? Like, hey, Covenant, like, how do I know you didn't fudge your numbers so you could be on the list? the thing is, you don't. Now, I
Yeah.
happen to know because I helped design the report. I know our
Yeah.
numbers are solid, but I can think of a few kind of bad actors out there where I know they're making their numbers up because I know the age of their fleet. I know a little bit about how they do their anyway. But I mean, if you can't audit it, then what's the
Let's not
point,
get into
right?
that. I don't want any subpoenas to start showing up at your door.
That's right. That's right.
There's that we want to stay away from.
That's right. Well,
So
it's a really, I love, it's funny. I'll get, this happened to me the other day. We're doing a quarterly business review for one of
yeah,
our larger customers. And,
yeah,
we all had, so they had flown in and everybody had like 15 minutes. I had like 20 minutes, right? And so there's the safety person, and there was the financial stuff, there was operations, and there was a sustainability guy, and then there was a thing on IT. It was going to last all day. So I'm second up, right? And everybody is stacked up behind me. And we had the strict, like, you need to stay to 15 minutes, right? And so I get into my part of the presentation. And after about 12 minutes, I had 3 or 4 slides left. And I said, well, I'm sorry, I'm not going to be able to show you the last 3 or 4 slides because I want to leave some time for Q&A in the 3 minutes that we have left. And the customer had like 10 people in the room, from their side. And the head guy said, well, I would like to see the rest of your presentation, Matt. And I'm like, well, okay, let's keep going, right? Because we're here for them. So I take about another 3 minutes and I kind of get to 2 of the 3 last slides. And he said, I'd really like to see that last one because I've kind of been looking forward because I had told him what it was going to be. I was like, well, I'm kind of out of time. He's like, well, you're here for me, so I want to see it. So I went over it with him. Now I'm at 20 minutes and I'm looking at my watch and there's other people in the back of the room. And this guy wants to talk about sustainability, right? And so 25 minutes. And I was like, I'm really sorry, we got to move on. And you're like, no, we've still got some more questions. Finally, after 40 minutes, I'm double over my time. I was like, I am really sorry, but if y'all are going to get out of here on time and take your flight, and they said, well, we flew on our own plane, so it's up to me to decide when we leave. And so,
there you go.
Where I'm going with that is that our customers are more and more interested about talking through these topics, not so much because of what we're doing right here and now, even though they are very interested in that, Michael, but what's possible. Like, what do you see in the future? What kind of things can we invest in together to help us kind of meet these goals that we have for like carbon neutrality by a certain date in the future? And I love those conversations because, they strengthen our relationship. We solve some really big problems. We're helping them meet their goals, and I get to play a role in it.
Yeah. Okay. So, and that's really interesting because I mean, that demand from people and like you said, you're working with them and you're collaborating and you're investing in these things. And to open up that investment part of it a little bit, there's those that say that you can't be profitable and run your ESG. What do you say to that?
So gosh, that's complicated. I mean, in some ways they're right. Like, let's say you want to, like, is there a way to be carbon neutral? I, I don't want to talk about that because, I don't want to, I have some pretty interesting opinions on that because I think that, carbon neutrality is really tough. If you want to be carbon neutral by 2050 and you're in the business of making something and you're a $20 billion business, then it's going to be really hard for you to get there.
You'd be extremely hard.
Because, you can't change your behavior to have zero impact. And so the other part of that is buying credits on the open market that's going to kind of allow you to get there. And so you could technically buy your way into carbon neutrality, but you might go broke doing it. But if you're Apple and you make like quadruple digit profit margins and you can afford to like buy the carbon credits for an Amazon rainforest or something, then you can do that and still be profitable if that's one of your goals. But for the most companies out there, it's expensive. So you have to kind of start slow and build over time. Let me say one more thing. There's this book by Bill Gates, How to Avoid a Climate Disaster, right? And in this book, he talks about people that have like 2030, 2040, 2050 initiatives. A lot of these goals, Vincent, are based on getting there with technology that hasn't been invented yet. So
Sure.
Gates is basically saying that, you know, I know that I have a venture capital fund that invests in some crazy stuff, and he does. And I'm expecting that 10% of those investments are going to pay off and create the next flux capacitor, which is going to radically change the way we do X, Y, or Z. And so I believe that our largest shippers that have these really aggressive plans are partially banking that roadmap on technology that hasn't been invented yet. Maybe Gavin Newsom is baking some of
Yeah.
his commitment for California. Of course, he thinks he'll be president by 2035, so he's not
Yeah.
even going to be there in the
Well,
governorship anymore.
and you're right, because you read in Reuters and Forbes, et cetera, that there's some war chests that are being built on the basis of an impending onslaught of greenwashing based on those goals that were based on technologies, et cetera. So there's people mitigating their risk or looking towards some risk in those areas. But I think we need to take those in order to move forward. But I agree with you 100% on what you're saying there. It takes time, and those investments are going to take time, and it's going to be more costly in the beginning. But do you agree or disagree that, I mean, it is basically your longevity and eventually your existence as a company. If you don't do these
Yeah,
things or follow, you're just not going to be here in 10, 15 years, 20 years, whatever it happens to be.
yeah, but at the same time, I mean, I don't think I would upset any of our shippers if I said this, because this is what I'm about to say is true of almost every fleet that I've talked to. But you know, to really move the needle on emission reduction in the Class 8 truck market, where a diesel truck on a long haul, full truckload, situation is
Yeah.
it's really difficult to do much better than we are now. But like,
Yeah.
in order for us to start chipping away at that number is going to require something higher than the rate that you're paying now. Maybe I put an electric APU on the truck, and maybe I, cache renewable diesel along the way, and in places because I can't get it reliably, but I can have it delivered on a route, to different places. Um, I have yet to meet very many shippers that are willing to pay a premium to cover that cost. Now, they want to do it, and their sustainability people and the leadership of their company says they want to do it, but are you willing to pay more for that? I'm going to be speaking on a panel at ACT Expo in May, out in California. It's one of the largest, like 8,000 people were there last year, but it's a fleet based kind of alternative energy sort of expo where there's lots of speakers on
Oh,
hydrogen and
nice.
electrification, compressed natural gas. And I'm going to be speaking on a panel. It's going to be me on the carrier side, and then somebody else on the shipper side. And we're going to talk about how we can work together to make great things happen. And, it'll be friendly and contentious because, somebody's going to say, well, Matt, what can you do? And I'll look at this person next to me and it's like, whatever he's willing to pay for. So it's,
And
it's, it's,
that's an interesting question, because does it come down to a question of marketing and education to the consumer as to what is going on with carbon footprint and how it can be impacted by the Class 8 trucks and logistics, et cetera, the surface transportation of trucks? Because in the arena that I'm in right now in plastics, better than 60% of the consumers will pay more for something that is made out of ocean bound or recycled plastics, given equal, equal quality. They'll pay more for that if you can show it and you can prove it. And is it just a matter of the demand is not flowing up through the shippers to hit this particular part of it at the carbon, or can they just absorb that there and not pass that on to you guys? I mean, where's that roadblock coming from? You know, is it an
man,
education thing maybe?
I mean, if I had that crystal ball, I'd
Yeah,
love to know the
yeah,
answer.
I get it. I get it. Matt, what's your favorite technology right now, man? You got all kinds of crazy gadgets there. I know you're calling in. It looks like you're calling in from the Arctic Circle and your little thing there. I imagine that, like, if you go outside, there's going to be blizzards and stuff. I know there's not,
Yeah.
but what's your favorite gadget, your favorite new technology that's coming on?
So last week I went up to Detroit, Michigan, with one of our engineers and looked at a product um, called Remora, from a company called Remora. Have you heard of them?
No. Remore?
So Remora. So a remora is a fish that attaches itself to another fish. It leeches. It lives off the other fish, right? It's usually attaches itself to the bottom of a shark and is constantly kind of sucking the algae and stuff that grows on its skin, right?
Okay.
It attaches to something else. So Remora is the name of the company because appropriately, this is I'll give you the quick overview and I'll go back and unpack it a little bit more. It's a 6,000 pound crazy heavy device that bolts onto the back of a Class 8 truck, hooks directly into the tailpipe, and absorbs 80% of the carbon that comes out of the tailpipe, converts it to a liquid. When the tanks on the truck fill up, after about 500-600 miles of operation, you offload that liquefied CO2 into a holding tank, which a company then picks up and sells it as a raw material in the manufacturing of concrete and steel. So,
wow. Okay.
I mean, that's the thing. It's crazy because here we've got this waste product out of the tailpipe that we're all trying to kind of get rid of. And in a liquid form, we needed so much CO2 last year. We mined it out of the ground. Most people don't realize we mine CO2, this product that we're trying to get rid of, right? Because it's warming up the planet. We actually spend billions of dollars pulling it out of the ground for all kinds of applications, including, fizzy water, Coke and, products like that. And so here's a really expensive, heavy device that bolts onto the back of a truck and has a revenue generation model to it to offset the cost of it over time. It would take a while to kind of unpack, what's left of it. But that's in essence, that's what it is. And we might be doing a pilot of it. They've been operating successfully. They've run thousands and thousands of miles. I can tell you they're going to be doing their first pilot with Ryder systems. They're going to be delivering those trucks pretty soon, and they're going to be operating them in the state of Kentucky. And so, they're going to have 80% of the carbon taken out of the tailpipe. And with very little, if negligible reduction in efficiency of that engine. So, you would think about what about the back pressure? What about, all the different things that potentially 6,000 pounds, that's going to slow the truck down. There's actually
you lose some payload, but that's about it, right?
Yeah, but if you're like, I don't know, if you're like Pepsi and you're, hauling Cheetos, 5,000 pounds of Cheetos.
It depends on the product, right? Yeah.
Because not everybody's hauling bottled water, so.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, that's true. That's interesting.
I'm really excited about this. I've spent some time with Daimler, Detroit engines. They make the engines. Cummins and Detroit make engines for the Freightliner trucks, which is mostly what we buy. So I've talked to their engineers, and they're really cautiously optimistic about it. They've kind of stopped short at giving it an endorsement, but from what they've seen, they like it. They want to put it on a shaker test, and make sure the thing's not going to fall off if you slam on the brakes. They need to make sure that the efficiency reduction on the engine is nothing significant. Any back pressure that's generated from the system doesn't cause, bigger problems with the engine. Maybe it invalidates the warranty. There's still a lot of work to be done, but they're far enough along for me to justify $1,000 plane ticket and a night in a hotel to go up there and take a look at it.
That's interesting. I'd like to know how big, if I had one that was like full trailer and full weight capacity, how much carbon could I call out of there, and could I make money actually just driving around pulling the carbon out of my tailpipe?
Yeah, you mean like if it'd be cheaper to generate carbon through the combustion process,
through driving around burning diesel.
That's kind of interesting. I've never thought of that. But what I didn't know is that we mine the stuff out of the ground. In fact, from what I understand, last year we had a shortage of CO2, right? The stuff that Greta Thunberg is yelling at you and me about, like, you're a bad person, you're killing me, no more gas stoves in your kitchen.
We need more CO2. Matt McLelland says we need more CO2. Yeah,
I know. Well, we got plenty of it. We just have to harness it out of the tailpipe. And maybe this Remora technology, is the greatest. Like, seriously, this could be the most disruptive thing in our industry. Like, it could be. Like, I'm not saying it will be, and I own no stock in the company. The founders, one of the co-founders is a young guy named Paul Gross. You should have him on your show sometime. Really
that's what I was just going to say. It's Remora.com. If you can do an introduction for me, that'd be sweet. Otherwise, I'm just going to hit him up.
RemoraCarbon.com. they've got 50, $60 million in private equity, in funding in their Series A. And from what I understand, they're fully subscribed. They had to quit taking money because so many people see the potential of this. So that's the thing I'm most excited about, Vincent.
That's very cool.
Is that product? And then
let me ask you. Go ahead.
ahead.
Okay.
Well, I'm
I was going to ask
about hydrogen. We're all excited about that. The big joke about hydrogen is, for the last 30 years, we've only been just a couple of years away from making it mainstream, and then, it just perpetuates and keeps taking longer and longer and longer. And so, we might be doing a hydrogen test in a couple of months with a company. I'm kind of waiting to see what happens there. Hydrogen,
decorated nanocarbons is what it is.
Expensive truck, hard to make the stuff, expensive to make the stuff,
and not green. So, it's not green to make it either.
No, it's not.
There's
purple hydrogen, there's yellow hydrogen, there's a lot of different colors of it. Green hydrogen is a myth.
So let me ask you this. This is my final question of the day before I want you to tell us what's new at Covenant and what's new for Matt McLelland. Is if you're sitting around waiting and banking on electric vehicles, are you wrong, and do you need to get off the pot and find something else?
So, it's funny. I get asked about that all the time, and it depends on a couple of things. It depends on what kind of fleet you are. Like for us, it doesn't make sense because we're long haul truckers, right? Yeah. And the charging infrastructure is not there, and the range isn't there. So we had one last year. We used it in a couple of small applications that we had that were out and back in the day.
I rode in it. You gave me
under 200 miles, and it was a great fit. But it was too expensive for one of the customers that we piloted it for. Mm-hmm. I would also say it depends on the state that you live in. If you really are counting carbon and you're looking at carbon intensity, if you lived in Washington, where 68% of your power comes from hydro, which is a renewable fuel source, versus say West Virginia, where maybe all your power comes from coal, then what have you really achieved at the end of the day? So I would say that's a factor. I would also say that, none of us really know exactly if one of the value propositions of these things is lower maintenance costs because there's fewer moving parts. We just don't have enough miles on these things yet. We have a lot of anecdotal evidence, like I remember, one of the owners of one of these major trucking companies, I was sitting next to him at a dinner one night, and he said, all I know is I've had my Tesla for 4 years and all I've ever done is put tires on it. I've never had to do anything to it. And he had like 120,000 miles on it.
There you go.
That's anecdotal. That doesn't mean that would be the same true for a Class 8 truck. But I think that's kind of one of the things we're all hoping for. So I think there's a place for it. And I think if you are the kind of company that can afford to go out and spend 2.5 times the price of a regular truck, do it, right? Do it. Find those incentives that are out there. Do it. So, it's a good fit. It's not for everybody.
Yeah. So let's wrap this up a little bit because we're going to have to do this again here real soon because this was awesome there, man. But what is new? What are we looking for from you? What are you bringing to the table there at Covenant? What are you guys doing?
Well, right now I'm working on our latest. It's called our Corporate Social Responsibility Report. It's basically like an ESG report without the metrics. This is our report from last year. It basically tells how Covenant is looking at our people, planet, and the community where we do business. What types of things are we doing? What kind of things are we optimistic about? What types of things are we testing? What sort of things do we see on the horizon? So we're one of about 10, 15, maybe 15 trucking companies that put out a report like this. So I'm working on that. It takes a while to really think through and sort of, I got to get a lot of the stuff approved so that I don't sort of get out over my skis and get too excited about, the art of the possible. Something else that's coming is, we're hopefully going to do an autonomous pilot sometime early this year. We partnered with 2 autonomous companies, and we're looking for a good partner, a good customer to do that with.
Nice.
In fact, our autonomous provider is ready for us to do it right now. So we are just kind of looking for the right opportunity in the right lane. Obviously, there's a driver in the truck. It's not an autonomous truck with no driver in it, but it's continuing to validate the technology and to help us build out what the cost model for that's going to look like. That's something we're excited about. And then, what else are we really excited about? I tell you, you and I, okay, so I hope your listener base, really listens to this next piece, but come to Chattanooga. There's so many exciting things going on related to freight
Oh
in
man.
Chattanooga.
Yeah.
And it's not just like freight waves. I mean, there's startups here in town. We're working with a company called Workhound, which is, driver communication tool over text. Max and his team are really cool, and they're based here. They were the result of an accelerator program that the Dynamo guys put on, which
That's
is a
right.
freight based, a trucking, transportation, logistics based venture capital firm. There's going to be something called the E-Mobility Summit, which is being put on in a couple of months by a local thing called the CoLab, the Chattanooga Company Lab. Steve Case, the founder of AOL, he's going to be the speaker at that thing. Come to Chattanooga sometime and look us up.
Yeah.
Right?
Check it out. No, it is beautiful. I moved here. Oh, wow. Almost 20 years ago, and I'm not leaving. I'm not leaving.
Yeah.
Best place
Yeah.
I liked it so
Yeah.
much. I married a native.
Kidding.
Yeah. That's
No
how much
kidding.
I
Yeah.
loved it.
Yeah. No, it's great. I love it. And it's it's a great place to live. It's funny because people get caught, they get stuck here because they don't want to leave. They get job offers. They're like, well, we're working remote is good, but we kind of need you because it's a senior level role and we need you to be in. So I got a friend of mine that just got offered. He's like a VP level guy at a local company. It's not even in transportation. He's got this C-level offer, but he's going to have to move to Dayton, Ohio. I know you're
Yeah,
from
no,
Ohio, so I'm not knocking him. He's like, I'm not leaving Chattanooga. Like, I love it here.
no,
I would I don't care what the role is.
no. I'm not. I'm from Ohio. I loved it. I'm not going back there. I'm staying. I'm staying here. Lived in Ohio. I lived Boston. I lived on the West Coast. I lived down in Florida. I'm not leaving here. No, this is a great place. I
Yeah.
love it. Come to Chattanooga. I agree with him. He's Matt McLelland. Check him out on LinkedIn and Instagram and all over the place, and Twitter, etc. Lots of cool
No, no,
stuff that you're speaking about.
no. If I'm on your show, Instagram at Chad the Van. So
Right
Chad
on.
is my Sprinter van that I do all my
Okay.
venture travel in. LinkedIn, I'm not on Twitter, but that's not like a statement. I've just never I had to limit
Yeah,
myself to like one or two things. I'm
it's all
not on
right.
Twitter. Craig Fuller thinks Twitter's the only platform people need to be on. So he and I've debated that before.
Yeah, yeah. I think Dooner's a big fan of Twitter and that stuff too. Not so much LinkedIn.
Yeah,
Although
and
he's on
Covenant
there.
Logistics.
Yeah,
Yeah, check us out. You can
you're coming
download
up.
our CSR report. You can look at that, and so there you have it.
Right on, brother. We'll check in with you again about what's new and new technologies and sustainability in the Class 8 truck and transportation markets. I love it, my friend, man. Peace and love to you.
All right, take care, buddy.